200 years ago, the continent trembled under the reign of a necromancer who commanded armies of the dead. Rise. But when he fell to the hero's blade, he didn't die. He was reborn. Archimond, the former terror of the continent, now awakens as the newborn heir of the very family that destroyed him. The Rainland family, legendary swordsmen who hate necromancy, expect their heir to swing a blade. He raises a skeleton instead. Bury it deep. If his secret is discovered, he faces execution. But in a world that despises his power, Archimonde is already planning a comeback! A comeback! This is the necromancer of a renowned sword family. Rise again! Rise again!
The undying king is having a very bad day. Archimonde, messy dark hair, purple highlights, the whole gothic aesthetic is leaned up against a graveyard of other people's swords, gasping like he just finished a marathon he never signed up for. He knows the ending, he's read the script, he's just not thrilled about performing it. The man who put him here, Burkle Rainland, rolls up with the energy of a protagonist who knows he's the protagonist. Archimonde is not having it. He starts screaming about hypocrisy and plagues and how he'll kill every knight with his own hands. Classic villain monologue, very committed, zero chill. The green aura pouring out of him says he's not done yet, even if his body disagrees. Burkle hits him with the numbers, 20 million dead, 20 million turned into soldiers by necromancy. That's not a war crime, that's a war business model. Archimonde fires back that Burkle's just here for hometown revenge, and Burkle doesn't deny it, he just redirects. Is fighting for the future, for descendants, for the whole pass the torch narrative that villains never see coming because they're too busy monologuing. Archimonde's strength finally taps out. He drops to his knees, tells Burkle to strike him, and Burkle, in a move that screams I have complicated feelings about this, lets his holy sword fall. Then he draws a darker blade and asks for last words. Archimonde smiles, says necromancers don't die that easily. Burkle proves him wrong with one swing. The head floats, the crowd cheers, the devil of the continent gets a very unceremonious ending. But here's the thing about necromancers, they don't read the same rule book. Archimonde's head hits the ground, his eyes close, and, patch notes incoming, his soul clocks out of that body and respawns somewhere else. Specifically, a nursery in a mansion. During a thunderstorm, the reincarnation speedrun is complete, and he has absolutely no idea what just happened. A stormy night, a mansion, two maids staring at a newborn baby, and Archimonde's soul wakes up screaming in an infant's body. The maids think the baby is about to say his first words, and they're technically correct in the most catastrophic way possible. Because what comes out of this baby's mouth isn't mama. It's a fully formed necromantic summoning incantation, screamed at full volume in a nursery. A bolt of lightning splits the sky outside, which is the universe's way of saying noted, and we're concerned. 15 years pass in the blink of an eye, and our reincarnated villain is now a silver-haired teenager walking through a sunny courtyard. The household ladies are captivated by his looks, calling him a masterpiece made by the gods, which is objectively hilarious given what's living inside that body. His name is Klein, second son of the Duke of Rhineland, and his peaceful stroll gets interrupted by a bucket of holy water dumped directly on his head. A voice behind him shouts, "Begone, evil spirit," because this is Priest Garrison Bertman, a man who has spent years convinced Klein is Archimonde reincarnated. Garrison is completely correct, which is the funniest part of this entire dynamic. He sprays Klein in the face, declares he sees Archimonde's face on him, and Klein asks if the man has genuinely lost his mind, because the alternative is admitting Garrison nailed it. Klein runs for his life, shouting, "I'm not Archimonde, my name is Klein," while Garrison's followers chase him through the estate. Garrison declares the punishment will be a bath in holy water, naked, which tells you everything about this man's approach to child rearing. Klein reflects on how this all started. He shouted Archimonde's necromantic formula as his first words in front of everyone, and people immediately looked at him like he was a demon. At age 3, they locked him in a monastery, and that's where he met Garrison, who is still calling him Archimond to his face. And Klein has no idea this is just the beginning. He's an ancient arch-necromancer trapped in a child's body, screaming internally about his severed head, and the universe just said, "Patch 2.0, good luck." What follows is Garrison's daily purification regimen, which includes 24-hour prayer songs that make Klein's ears bleed, frozen garlic baths with chanted mantras, and the Purification Fire Show, where he ties Klein to a cross and lights fires around him. Klein screams for someone to save him from this hell, and honestly, fair. This is the same man who once commanded a legion of 20 million undead, now bound to a cross surrounded by campfire-level flames, while a priest chants at him. The power scaling is genuinely tragic, and the series knows it. 5 years later, Klein is completely exhausted from years of this treatment, wearing a party hat at what appears to be a birthday celebration. His personal maid, Erin, a small red-haired girl, prays that young Lord Klein will live as a descendant of a hero and become a healthy family member. The dramatic irony is lethal. She's praying for him to live as a descendant of the hero Burkle, the man who killed him. Klein, surrounded by holy prayers and exhausted beyond patience, throws the party hat to the floor in frustration. And Erin gets upset because she thinks she made it. Klein feels guilty, apologizes, and reaches down to pick it up, at which point Erin reveals she didn't make the hat. Garrison made it. Klein stops dead in his tracks, and there stands Garrison with tears of joy in his eyes because the young lord is wearing his handmade hat. Klein picks up the hat, looks at Garrison's teary, proud expression, and immediately tears the hat apart, declaring he's not wearing it. Garrison's tears of joy become shouts that Archimonde's evil spirit has returned, because in this household, refusing a party hat is evidence of demonic possession. Klein fires back with a line that rhymes with Archimonde my base and carries roughly that level of diplomatic restraint. At that exact moment, the door opens and in walks Dunkel, knight and leader of the Red Chariot Knights, who asks Garrison if the purification ritual is finally over. Dunkel drops a critical piece of information. The rumors about Klein being Archimonde are 10 years old, and the Order has already ruled there's no issue. Garrison immediately releases Klein and goes to speak with Dunkel professionally, because even a zealot respects institutional authority. Klein watches Garrison switch from manic zealot to polished professional in one breath, and realizes this man is excellent at playing social games. Garrison tells Klein he'll be back soon and adds a quiet warning. There's always a what-if in the future, and anything could happen. Then Garrison steps out the door, comes back in to say goodbye, and tells Klein the next purification ritual is next Friday. Keep your body and heart pure. Klein tells him to get lost, sits down, and asks aloud whether a priest should really be torturing a child like this. He looks more like a macabre demon than a priest, honestly. Erin walks in and asks Klein directly, "Young master, you're really not Archimonde anymore, right?" And Klein replies that he's definitely not, while thinking the exact opposite inside his own head. He says he hates even hearing the name, which is the most honest thing he's said all day, because admitting it means torture, and he needs to recover before anyone finds out the truth. Since rebirth, he's lived under constant surveillance, locked in a monastery for 7 years because of rumors he was Archimonde. Klein scratches his head in frustration, thinking he finally made it back to the duchy, only to have that priest make his life hell. Dunkel explains that Garrison is an agent, a title reserved for the strongest member of the Holy Order, and aside from the Duke himself, nobody in the family can face him. Erin gets excited that the young master's family is so strong, then asks Dunkel who was the strongest Duke in the family's history. Dunkel says they were all incredible, but in his opinion the current 7th Duke, Klein's father, is the strongest. Klein immediately cuts him off and says the first Duke, with a seriousness that surprises everyone in the room. Dunkel concedes, and Erin notes that Klein has always liked the first Duke the most. He's still staring at the portrait. 200 years, Klein thinks, staring at the portrait of Burkle Rhineland. He still can't believe it. The necromancer Archimonde, reborn as a descendant of the very man who killed him with his own hands. If you've ever had to smile at a family portrait of the person who ended your entire existence, drop ancestral trauma in the comments. I'll wait. Coin jolts awake from a horrific dream, gasping, reliving the moment of his death all over again. He thinks to himself, "My name is Archimond, the legendary necromancer, the devil of the continent, and I nearly destroyed everything in my rage before Burkle killed me." Then he opened his eyes and 200 years had passed, reborn as a descendant of his killer, with every memory intact. He's sitting on the edge of his bed, catching his breath when a voice cuts through the room. It's Garrison, smiling, asking if Klein was dreaming of his time as Archimonde again. Before Klein can fabricate an excuse, Erin bursts in shouting that she heard everything he said in his sleep. "Destroy the continent, kill them all. I, Archimonde, command you." Klein's blood runs cold. He tells her to watch her mouth and turns to Garrison, calling her a liar. Butler Berkman delivers the news that the Duke has ordered Klein to attend the swordsmanship demonstration properly this time, which his parents speak for, "I want to see you there, and you will not embarrass me." Klein processes this with the enthusiasm of someone who's been summoned to a performance review he didn't schedule. Berkman explains that collateral branches of the family have come to meet them, which is aristocratic code for distant relatives who want things from you. Klein's response is the polite scoff of a man who has been a continent-destroying necromancer and now has to make small talk with cousins. The collateral cousins immediately prove why they're collateral by greeting Klein with jokes about him being Archimond, which is the one true thing anyone has ever said in this household, and somehow always lands as a punchline. Delane joins in with a teasing warning that Klein might curse them, which is funnier than he realizes. A woman from the Western branch sits among the cousins, radiating the specific energy of someone who came to judge everyone and brought a checklist. Klein ignores the insults and keeps walking because he has been alive for 2 centuries and does not have time for branch family posturing. One cousin blocks his path, demanding to know how Klein can just walk past them. Klein delivers the line that he doesn't even remember their names, which is not a flex he's performing. It's a genuine administrative limitation of having too many relatives and zero interest in cataloging them. The cousins snap back that they're his superiors, which is a claim that collapses on contact with the fact that they're standing in his family's house eating his family's food. Klein privately concludes there's only one reason these people are acting bold. The main family is falling apart. Attention shifts to the arena where a purple-haired swordsman lunges desperately at his opponent, gets countered, and hits the ground hard. He demands his opponent stop holding back, which is the battle cry of someone who is losing and wants to lose faster. The blonde standing over him is Delane, Klein's older half-brother, blocking every follow-up attack with a calm smile that says he already knows how this ends. Delane declares the match already over, which is the kind of thing you can say when you're upholding the family name and your opponent is upholding a grudge. The purple-haired rival swears things will be different this time, which is the most cursed sentence in any combat narrative. Delane surges forward, his movements accelerating past what the eye can track as golden energy wraps around him. Coin watches with his eyes glowing faint purple, dissecting every footstep, every weight shift, every hidden mana flow in the family's secret technique. He's basically running combat analysis software on his brother's sword form in real time. Delane unleashes the Meteor sword technique, a named family secret art, and it connects dead center. The judge calls the bout immediately, and Delane offers his opponent a polite smile while noting the strike would have caused real injury at full intent. Delane spots Klein in the audience and grins, saying he would have tried even harder if he'd known his little brother was watching. Klein looks at his brother's perfect technique and perfect smile and feels genuine disgust because he can smell a performance from 2 centuries away. The room shifts as Heinkel Rhineland, the 7th Duke himself, enters. Klein feels a jolt of alarm because this is the man whose approval he actually wants, packaged in the body of the man whose ancestor killed him. The Duke gives Delane a rare nod of approval, and Commander Dunkel praises the boy's mastery as extraordinary for his age. Heinkel is formally announced as the 7th Duke of Rhineland, and the room treats it like a boss intro because functionally it is one. Dalton bows with practiced humility, claiming he still has much to learn, which is what you say when you've already won. A noble observes that Dalton is likely the last shred of the Duke's pride, which is a devastating thing to say about a 15-year-old's role in his father's emotional landscape. The purple-haired rival mutters that it's overwhelming talent, and Dalton smiles through the sweat. Dalton thanks his father with a deep bow, and Heinkel's gaze then turns to Klein. The Duke says his name, and the temperature in the room drops several degrees. Heinkel places his hand on Klein's head and coldly declares he feels not a single spark of mana within him. Klein lowers his head and apologizes, because in this world, a noble without magic is considered little more than deadweight with a surname. Commander Dunkel steps in to defend Klein, suggesting the years isolated in the monastery stunted his development. The damage is already done, though, because the crowd has what it needs. The whispers spread like wildfire. The second son of Rhineland has no mana. If the main line has become this useless, the branch families should seize control, which is the exact conversation these cousins came here to have out loud. Klein walks away telling himself he can endure the personal insults, but then he remembers Burkel's words about protecting the future. His fists clench hard enough to turn knuckles white, because the bitter irony is that he died to a man whose descendants turned into this. Dalton, the purple-haired branch family loudmouth, blocks Klein's path and taunts him about being an heir too incompetent to swing a sword. Klein looks at Dalton and sees exactly what he is, a talentless busybody of zero strategic value. Dalton raises his fists in rage, and Klein casually sweeps his legs out, sending him face first into the stone floor. Blood leaks from Dalton's nose as Klein advises him not to take his frustrations out on others, which is advice Dalton will absolutely not internalize. Desperate and humiliated, Dalton screams a final insult, calling Klein a motherless nobody. Klein's head turns, and his eyes ignite with a terrifying predatory glow that makes Dalton's skin go pale with genuine dread. The former necromancer wonders how much longer he has to play the weakling as ancient magic stirs faintly in his veins. He recalls the radiant image of the hero who slew him and feels genuine pity for how far Burkel's bloodline has fallen. His grim reflection asks why the family of the hero who killed him turned out like this, which is a question that doubles as a personal audit. Dunkel notices the shift in Klein's expression with visible concern. Commander Dunkel arrives and orders Dalton to cease his pathetic scene, and Dalton lacks the courage to talk back to a man of that rank. He retreats with a snide remark about Klein being grateful for his protective bodyguard, which is the emotional equivalent of a toddler throwing a cracker on the way out. Dalton hops away in what can only be described as a ridiculous gait, and the commander stares after him in genuine confusion at whatever that exit was. Dunkel turns back and assures Klein the area is secure. Klein watches Dunkel with an unreadable expression, then asks a simple question. Does he have a spare sword he could borrow? The commander hands him a heavy blade in a dark, misty forest that night, questioning why the young master needs a weapon at this hour. The commander deduces the boy is clinging to a desperate dream of becoming a swordsman and privately pities him because without mana, no amount of effort matters. A person without magical power can never become a knight of the Empire, which is a rule the universe wrote before it met Klein. Unaware of this pity, Klein closes his eyes and summons the memory of Dalton's arena performance with crystalline clarity. He begins reproducing the footwork, the weight shifts, the exact toe-tip propulsion, his body moving with precision that has no business existing in a 15-year-old. A volatile purple aura begins coiling around the blade as he recreates the Meteor sword's trajectory with terrifying accuracy. Purple sparks crackle around his glowing eye, and the atmosphere shifts violently enough that the commander spins around. The commander stands paralyzed, unable to process the overwhelming aura radiating from the boy he thought was a maneless waste. Klein unleashes a colossal jagged purple energy strike toward a massive boulder, and the rock is sliced clean in half. The commander is left utterly speechless, his reality crumbling as he stares at the cleanly severed stone. Klein turns around with a surprised, knowing smile, because the ancient power he once wielded is finally beginning to answer his call again. He replicated a family secret technique after watching it once, without mana, in a dark forest, at night. The maneless boy is anything but, and the commander's entire worldview just got bisected alongside that boulder. The morning after whatever that was, two household men attending to someone flat on their back, like the estate just lost a coin flip with gravity. Klein is kneeling in the hall with Dunkel, Aaron, and Butler Berkman, which means either a family meeting or someone is about to get scolded in four-part harmony. A sealed envelope shows up, and in this house a sealed envelope is never good news. It's either an invoice, a summons, or an invitation to someone's funeral. Klein wipes his face and blinks like he's trying to remember if he has any enemies left who haven't sent him mail yet. He reads the letter, fingers tense, and the paper is doing that dramatic crumple thing that only happens when the protagonist is about to make a terrible decision. Klein tells someone he doesn't really have a reason to refuse, which is protagonist speak for "I absolutely see the trap, and I'm walking into it anyway." He glances toward a sword leaning against the wall, and you can practically hear the patch note, skill, acquired, perfect copy after one viewing. Klein stands there as some unseen force throws a boulder-sized punch at him, and he looks less worried than someone who's just been handed a mild inconvenience. Priest Garrison is lurking with that "today I feel something off" energy, which for Klein is basically a daily weather report. Garrison says today feels different, and the man has spent a decade purifying a baby for spooky vibes. If he says the energy is heavy, you believe him. The Rhineland carriage rolls toward a white stone fortress that looks like it was built by someone who really wanted to flex on the neighbors. Erin is motion sick in the carriage, Garrison is comforting her, and Klein is watching like a man who has already filed this under "not my problem." Dunkel tries to hand something to Klein. Klein corrects him with a flat "no, I meant give it to Erin," and the knight's dignity takes another small casualty. A flashback/battle memory cuts in, silhouettes, buried swords, neon energy, because Klein cannot have one peaceful carriage ride without his trauma doing a cameo. Klein stares into the middle distance with the kind of face you make when you remember your last life's war crimes, and now someone else's founding myth. They arrive at the Corwell estate, and the courtyard alone has more square footage than most small kingdoms. Someone definitely squeezed Rhineland for spare change. Klein turns his head, and that profile shot is the universal anime signal for "someone I despise" is about to speak. Dalton shows up with a smug expression of a man who thinks he's already won a fight that hasn't started. His hunting hounds are snarling, drooling, and glowing-eyed, which is how you know this is a classy event and not a liability nightmare at all. Dalton brags about the thick walls and high ceilings, and Klein asks the only question that matters: since when did a hunting contest become a social hour? Klein says it out loud: this whole thing has the energy of a networking event where the main course is murder. Dalton laughs it off and says he's already got everything ready, which is villain speak for the ambush is loading. Dalton commands his hounds to spring, and the silhouettes behind him are doing absolutely nothing to make this look less like a coordinated hit. The dogs bolt into the woods with the kind of desperate hunger that suggests Dalton forgot the part where hunting dogs are supposed to hunt animals, not social climbers. A muscular figure delivers a brutal strike in the chaos, and Dalton is out here treating wildlife cruelty like a LinkedIn achievement. Dalton draws his bow, explains that starving dogs smell food 100,000 times better, and proves it by shooting his own hounds when they reach the bait. The hounds go down mid-yelp, and Dalton is celebrating like he just unlocked a trophy for being the worst person at the party. He laughs and calls it a successful hunt, which really tells you everything about how this man defines success. Dalton leans in with that predatory smile, and Erin, bless her, steps forward to defend Klein's honor before anyone asks her to. Klein catches Erin by the arm, holding her back because he already knows this is about to escalate from insulting to medically inadvisable. Dalton grabs Erin's arm with bruising force, and that is the exact moment his life expectancy starts doing a countdown. Klein's hand clamps around Dalton's wrist like a vice, and his eyes have that cold, predatory fury that says the tutorial boss just picked the wrong dialogue option. He warns Dalton to take his hands off her, or he'll snap the arm where he stands, and the delivery is so flat you could use it as a level. Dalton swings a desperate punch. Klein tilts his head out of the way with insulting ease, and the panic on Dalton's face is now the main character. Dalton grabs Klein by the shoulder, then thinks better of it and leaps onto his horse, challenging Klein to follow him into the woods. Dunkel says it's too dangerous to go alone, but Klein has that "I have 11 skeletons in my pocket" confidence and mounts up anyway. Klein orders Dunkel to stay behind and protect Eren, then shows him a magic scroll with a glowing crescent. Tear it if Klein vanishes, and a crest will appear on his hand. Dunkel holds the scroll, and the knight's expression says he's just been handed the worst emergency contact in history. Klein spells out the contingency: if he disappears, tear the scroll immediately, because nothing says trust like a magical panic button. The crest will appear on the back of his hand, which is basically Find My iPhone if Apple ran on necromancy and spite. Klein rides after Dalton into the woods, and the chase scene is giving final boss pursuing a side quest enemy energy. The horse gallops through a misty skeletal forest, and Klein looks calmer than someone riding toward an obvious ambush has any right to. Dalton lunges with his sword, because apparently the first stage of grief for a failing villain is denial, and the second stage is swinging steel at a necromancer. Klein stands in the clearing with a dark beast at his side, looking like he brought a pet to a knife fight and is not apologizing for it. His eyes narrow with calculation, and that is the exact frame where Dalton should have turned the horse around and gone home. Klein dismounts in the moonlit clearing as a blade-like silhouette cuts through the air from off-panel. The ambush is no longer pretending to be subtle. Dalton grips his sword with rage, surrounded by a circle of slaughtered animals, and announces that this is the grand finale of their competition. Dunkel arrives anyway, sword drawn, because no amount of orders can stop a knight from walking into the same bad decision as his young master. Klein tells Dalton he's nothing but an empty shell with no power nor purpose, and the insult lands with the precision of a man who has been waiting to say it. Dalton smiles with pure malice and signals his backup, because when the main character calls you a shell, the correct response is apparently to bring more shells. Hooded archers emerge and draw their bows, and the hunting competition has officially become a PvP zone with no respawn timer. They mock the Rhineland name, call the young master dog food, and accuse him of bad luck for being born into the wrong family. Klein smiles and says it's for the children's future, which is the most unhinged thing you can say while surrounded by armed men and dead dogs. His eye goes wide with realization, or possibly with the exact moment he decides everyone here is getting a very short funeral. Klein swipes his hand across his face, rain lashing down, and the mask drops. Not the noble boy, not the talentless second son, just the thing underneath. Dalton asks why he's laughing and whether he's finally lost his mind, which are fair questions when your victim starts cackling in the middle of an ambush. Klein covers his face with one hand, shoulders shaking, because the irony of being ambushed by the descendants of his own murderer's vassals is genuinely breaking him. He looks up, and his eyes are glowing red, Klein on one side, Archimonde on the other, and the visual says what the cover story never could. Dalton is sweating now, the kind of full-body terror sweat you produce when you realize you didn't corner a noble kid, you cornered a final boss. Klein's eye catches with crimson light, and the atmosphere shifts from hunting accident to war crime reconstruction. He asks Dalton he dares insult and mock the family built on his own death, and the answer, obviously, is that Dalton very much dared and is now regretting it. A violent blue aura explodes from Klein's body, shaking the ground, and Dalton screams that it must be hidden magic. Klein corrects him with a wicked grin. This isn't magic, it's pure demonic energy, which is somehow both worse and more on brand. The henchmen panic, wondering what kind of monster they cornered, while Klein steps forward haloed in spectral blue fire, like a man who has done this before, because he has. One of them shouts, "What the hell is he?" And honestly, that's the question the whole continent is going to be asking eventually. Klein smiles and confirms, yes, he just said demonic energy, and the delivery is so cheerful it should come with a content warning. The word feast hangs in the void, and if you've ever wondered what a dinner invitation from a necromancer looks like, here it is. A spectral skeleton erupts from the darkness, translucent teal, flame-haired, one glowing eye. Rudol's Death Knight form makes its first dramatic cameo. More spectral skulls manifest, and the forest clearing is now hosting a bone-themed light show with extremely hostile choreography. Dunkel stares in disbelief, asking if it could really be what he thinks it is, and the answer is yes. Dunkel, your young master is the final boss. Cloying stands calm amid a legion of skeletal warriors, the Undying King's full historical horde finally making a guest appearance in the present day. He points at the ambush party and commands his creations to devour every last one of them, and the tone is so casual he might as well be ordering room service. Cut to Archimonde standing alone in a wasteland of skulls, because the story wants to remind you that the cute noble boy is also the ancient demon king who lost count of the dead. Back in the present, Dunkel and Garrison are facing something huge in a fob chamber, and the red aura says this ambush has a boss phase. A disheveled young man stands at the center of teal skeletal specters, reaching out as if to command them, and the buried necromantic power is no longer buried. Randall reacts with shock and whispers the name Archimonde, which is the worst possible name to whisper when you're supposed to be killing a Rhineland heir. Coin stands amid swirling mist with shadowy auras circling him like spirits in judgment, looking like a man who has already read the ending. A rival mocks him for summoning low-level trash, and the skeletons seem to take it personally. You can tell by the way they start reattaching their own heads. Hooded archers draw their bows. A crossbowman takes aim, and the ambush party is about to learn that conventional weapons do not impress the undead. A volley of arrows rains down toward the skeletons, and for one optimistic second the henchmen probably think this is going to work. Klein is thrown back by a heavy impact, but the skeletons don't even flinch. They're already proving more durable than his social reputation. Rudel's spectral form looms over Klein, glowing orange eyes staring down, and the Death Knight is clearly not here to ask permission. Klein smirks and says, "No one recognizes these skeletons anymore," which is the villain equivalent of, "Let me show you my vintage collection." He adds that if these were typical skeletons, he could see why they'd be surprised, the understatement of the century, given the reattaching head situation. Klein stands calmly in a dark void surrounded by dozens of skeletal warriors with glowing yellow eyes, and the ambush party's courage is about to be stress-tested. Dunkel watches the fight unfold and realizes these aren't the skeletons he knows, which is a polite way of saying the difficulty curve just spiked. A skeleton decapitates a man, the head spins through the air, and then the skeleton calmly reattaches its own head like it's adjusting a tie. 3 hooded skeletal reapers glide forward with curved blades, and the henchman's morale officially enters freefall. A scarred man orders everyone to drop the crossbows and switch to close combat, which is a bold call when the enemy is already winning the close combat portion. The fight becomes a chaotic melee. Klein strikes a hooded figure, a skull flies into the foreground, and the hunting competition is now just a massacre with branding. A henchman swears he took a skeleton's head off, then watches it reattach and realizes his entire understanding of undead combat is outdated. A bald, scarred man curses in frustration because when the skeletons start regenerating mid-fight, even the hired muscle starts updating his resume. Klein raises a hand in a defensive gesture as the undead close in, looking less like a hunted boy and more like a conductor about to finish a symphony. The ambush party reaches toward him in desperation, and Klein's expression says the only thing they're going to grab is a very short afterlife. The estate courtyard is empty, the fountain still, the carriage waiting like the setup to a very expensive mistake. Priest Garrison is telling Aaron monastery stories, and Aaron is tugging his sleeve with the patience of a child who has already decided the story is too long. Meanwhile, someone smiles like a man who has already read the spoiler, and Aaron gives the exact look of a kid who knows the adults are up to something. Klein reaches out, voice breaking, begging someone to stop, while a man runs for his life and an armored figure braces for impact. Blades clash in the rain, Blood splatters the foreground, and our boy extends one finger like he's about to deliver a verdict, not a mercy. Fast, a strike lands, a body folds, another slash cuts the air. Klein's side is not here to negotiate. A hooded figure lunges, a spectral enemy looms, and a man snarls that this is not going the way the brochure promised. Klein is hurled into the air, lands hard, and comes up with an expression that says he's done pretending to be the weaker party. A radiant strike slices past Klein's head. He stands calm in the rain, and the panel dissolves into static, like the universe needs a moment. Energy cracks. Purple shards erupt. Two fighters surge at each other, and an old man's hand grips a sword with the energy of someone who did not come here to retire. Garrison and a cloaked figure clash under arcing purple lightning, and someone realizes mid-fight that this is Delane's technique. Klein stands over the fallen and says flatly that his enmity has made him stronger, which is the kind of line you deliver after the fight, not during it. Dunkel asks what just happened. An armored figure lies in the mud, and someone demands to know what anyone is talking about. Dalton is face down in the grass, and Klein looks at him with the emotional warmth of a man reading a terms of service agreement. A grey-haired figure opens one wary eye. Darkness swallows the scene. A hand rests on stone, and a single armored boot steps forward into whatever comes next. Dalton wakes in a stone hall. A seated young man tells him he's awake, and Klein watches from the shadows with the patience of a debt collector. A formal figure says yes. A dog snarls, and three shadowy hounds charge forward accusing Dalton of habitual abuse in the name of hunting. Garrison and a cloaked figure cross blades. Dalton shouts nonsense, and Klein stares back in the silence of someone who has already read the verdict. Memory fragments slash across the panel, and a cold voice tells Dalton what he already suspects. You're already dead. The afterlife states its purpose. Dalton screams that it's impossible. Dunkel looks horrified, and Dalton begs to be let go. A young man conjures blue fire. Archimonde watches sternly, and a dark armored figure stands before a horde of glowing-eyed monsters, like a manager addressing his teen. Wolves bare their fangs. Dunkel reacts like he just saw his own funeral, and the monsters growl with the kind of enthusiasm that suggests nobody is getting a refund. Garrison lunges through the dark green blades carved through shadowy figures, and Dalton is told to remember this before the hounds take their due. A monster screams, a single eye sheds a tear, and Dalton collapses in the grass with the exhausted dignity of a man who is lost at every level of existence. Klein stands serene among the debris, and Dalton wakes again on a jagged cliff because apparently one death wasn't enough paperwork. A knight draws his blade. Klein summons skeletal warriors with glowing orange eyes, and a man in a suit reacts to the spectral skeleton the way most people react to a spider in the shower. Rudel's spectral form erupts with a silent roar. Klein stands alone in a vast void, and the scene pauses like the universe is buffering. Dead soldiers ask why they return to life. A hooded figure speaks from the mist, and Klein reacts with the exact face of someone who did not order this plot twist. Klein asks who the stranger is. The hooded figure smirks like a tutorial boss, and teal energy spheres swirl in two hands at once. The hooded figure blasts teal energy, a man is consumed by it, a massive eye flares, and the stranger raises the dead with the casual energy of someone reheating leftovers. A hooded pursuer closes in. A voice names its soul return magic that controls corpses, and Klein realizes he's watching another necromancer do market research on his technique. Dalton stares with the intensity of a man whose investment portfolio just crashed, and a pink-haired girl reaches out as a knight turns away from a fight he doesn't want. Klein and Dunkel both say they'll listen later, which is adult code for we are about to do something we will not explain afterward. A worn letter with a celestial emblem appears. Riders charge to a sigil-lit chamber, and guards sprint across a marble floor that costs more than their annual salary. Dunkel says the hunting competition is still in progress. A young man stares hard at the horizon, and guards spot the Canwell family crest and wonder if these are Dalton's men. The guards keep asking, Dunkel introduces himself as Klein's personal guard, and the Canwell men suddenly remember they have somewhere else to be. A voice warns that if the priest disappears, they should tear the scroll. A cloaked figure demands understanding, and Dunkel's concern finally overrides his politeness. Dunkel tells Aaron to listen carefully. A red-haired youth surveys the hall, and Aaron goes silent with the worried focus of a child who knows the adults are lying. A tall man says his bad feeling was right. Dunkel and Klein react with matching alarm, and a conspirator thinks the priest who followed him is suspicious. A struggle breaks out. Garrison and Dunkel clash in the courtyard, and Klein grits his teeth because the cover story is officially not covering anything. A blade arcs through Blue Force, and Klein admits out loud what the audience already knew: he can't use necromancy right now. Klein gasps in realization. A cloaked figure lunges with a knife. A hooded necromancer commands zombies, and Klein lands hard in a crater of his own making. A line of armed figures advances. A masked figure raises a sword. A bald man screams, and a gaunt man slumps in a doorway as unseen power presses in. Gordon appears for one panel and immediately looks like he wants to file a complaint. A feral figure lunges, and a voice tells Klein he's screwed. Klein's eyes ignite purple. A hooded figure recoils in terror. Golden light explodes, and a blazing strike tears through the dark. Klein stands in a void of golden light. Garrison erupts in molten energy, and a young man trades a decisive blow with shockwaves for punctuation. A sword falls through fire. A man with glowing eyes smirks, and Klein is knocked back by a dark slash that says the fight is not over. Energy pillars crash. Debris flies. A cloaked figure is blasted backward, and the sky turns the color of a finale. A silhouetted man stands in white void. A masked figure stares in shock, and a decisive strike flashes across the panel before the scarred man sees his own end coming. The scarred man's eye goes wide, and that is the exact face of someone who just realized he picked the wrong protagonist to ambush. So the church's ultimate human weapons finally get their law drop. 3 exarchs, hand-picked by the Pope, each one supposedly packing the martial punch of an entire fortress. The necromancer asks who this newcomer is, which is already the wrong question. The right question is, why did you pick a fight in the one forest where God's personal nuke happened to be camping? The priest introduces himself flatly as an exarch, and the necromancer's whole plan visibly dies behind that mask. Klein watches the man he knew as a simple parish priest reveal he's actually the strongest of the chosen 3. The exarch steps in front of the kid like a mobile fortress with a grudge. The zombies lunge anyway because necromancers don't get hazard pay for good decisions. What follows is less a battle and more a public service incineration. The exarch channels holy fire, baptizes the undead in it, and commands the sinners to pray before they become particulate matter. One stomp, one shockwave of golden energy. The remaining undead puppets scatter like leaves in a storm, and the exarch calls this mercy. Final judgment, but make it pastoral care. The necromancer gets launched by sheer pressure, already mentally updating his will. His carefully laid plan just collided with the most terrifying force the Holy Order has on payroll. He spits that divine power is a grand lie, then immediately turns to flee. The mask slips. Moonlight hits his face. His secret identity lasts about as long as his dignity. The exarch materializes in his path like a vengeful god with excellent timing. The priest's mental pressure invades the necromancer's mind, crushes his will, and whispers that the prayer isn't over yet. One final, purifying strike. The necromancer becomes a neat pile of grey ash, proving once again that the church's customer service department does not accept returns. Klein watches the execution with rapt attention, then notices one of the necromancer's eyes roll across the dirt and stop at his feet. The exarch didn't just win. He won with terrifying efficiency. A blood-stained hand clamps onto Klein's shoulder. The exarch has questions. He sensed a surge of necromancy and rushed here. But now that he's standing in the exact spot, something feels wrong. The aura of death came from this exact spot, but it doesn't belong to the boy. The exarch gaze sharpens. Klein realizes one wrong move, one wrong word, and this holy man erases him on the spot. Thundering hooves break the standoff. The commander arrives shouting Klein's name and alarm. Klein feels a flicker of relief, which is adorable, because his body has already decided the night is over. His legs buckle. The world tilts. The commander leaps from his horse and catches him before he faceplants in the dirt. Klein whispers that his strength has simply vanished. When the commander asks about the hunting party, Klein confirms coldly that he eliminated Dalton in the heat of battle. The boy who started this whole mess is now a footnote. Nearby, a single white flower sways in the silent, dark wind of the forest. It's splattered with crimson droplets now, because this story does not do subtle symbolism. The necromancer has spent this whole fight acting like she owns the room, and then the actual landlord walks in. A Berkman steps out of the dark, except he's not a Berkman anymore. He's an exarch, which is holy order speak for, we brought the nuke. Exarchs are the church's final patch, 3 chosen weapons who get to swing around St. Galahad's leftovers, and apparently one of them is worth an entire fortress in PvP. The necromancer's aura starts folding like a paper chair under the holy pressure, and our boy Klein watches this simple priest turn into the scariest thing in the forest. The exarch puts himself between Klein and the undead and promises to guard him against all evil, which is the kind of line that sounds heroic until you remember he is also here to murder necromancers. The zombies charge anyway because zombies have a skill issue with reading the room. He raises what the transcript calls a sacred home, but we all know is a sacred horn, and the baptism of fire incinerates the undead mid-shamble. One stomp sends a golden shockwave through the dirt, tossing the remaining puppets like leaves, and the exarch calls it mercy. That is a very specific definition of mercy. She gets launched by sheer pressure alone, and her internal monologue is basically, why is an exarch doing a world boss spawn in my backwoods assassination quest? She curses, accepts that her plan just ran headfirst into the church's hardest difficulty slider, and tries to flee. Her mask falls off mid-escape, because if you're going to lose, you might as well do it with your face exposed. She doesn't get far. The exarch appears in front of her like a pop-up ad for divine judgment and asks, very calmly, where she thought she was going. She shrieks as the exarch's mental pressure invades her mind, and honestly, same. The Berkman whispers that the prayer isn't over yet, then delivers a final purifying strike that turns her into grey ash. Klein watches the execution, then notices one of the necromancer's eyes roll across the dirt and stop at his feet. Klein leans down to pick up the eye, which is the kind of detail that tells you this man has been through things. He reflects that the exarch obliterated over 20 bodies just by stepping forward, one step, and the mere pressure of his presence did the cleanup. Then a blood-stained hand clamps onto Klein's shoulder with bruising force. The exarch has questions. He says he rushed here the moment he sensed necromancy, but now that he's standing in the exact spot, something feels off. The aura of death didn't come from the boy, yet it came from right here. His gaze turns sharp enough to cut paper, and Klein realizes he is one wrong word away from being added to the ash pile. The standoff holds just long enough for the audience to sweat, and then thundering hooves break the silence. The commander arrives, shouting Klein's name like the cavalry in a western. Klein feels a flicker of relief, but his body has finally had enough. Channeling even a fraction of his old necromancy in this fragile teenage frame was too much, and his legs buckle. The commander leaps from his horse and catches him before he faceplants into the dirt. The commander asks what happened, and Klein whispers that his strength simply vanished. Asked about the hunting party, he confirms coldly that he eliminated Dalton in the heat of battle. Nearby, a single white flower is now splattered with crimson droplets, swaying in the dark wind. That's not symbolism, that's a threat. Back to the mansion, the inquiry is already heated. Count Canwell, Dalton's father, slams his fists on the table and refuses to believe his son would try to assassinate a duke's heir. An investigator slides him a document proving 20 of his own mercenaries were at the scene, and the Count's face goes pale. He pivots fast. It makes no sense, he argues. Dalton was a trained warrior, and everyone knows Klein has no mana and can't fight. Therefore, the boy must have hired an assassin, killed Dalton, and framed him. He even drags in the bizarre rumors about Klein's late mother to poison the room. Right as the Count's accusations hit fever pitch, a commanding voice cuts through from the entrance. "Shut your mouth." Klein walks in with a dry smirk, noting that there seems to be no limit to the nonsense these men will speak. He states plainly that he acted in self-defense, and that the Bertman helped him against the real threat, the Necromancer. The Count calls him a liar, so Klein meets his gaze with an iron-cold stare and eyes that flash with faint mocking pink light. He asks if his being Archimonde is now an established fact in their minds, then reminds everyone of the vow he made the moment Dalton died to rebuild the crumbling foundations of the Heinen family with his own hands. His voice carries a chilling conviction. He will rebuild the family, and no more vermin will obstruct his path. The room is so thick with tension, you could sell it as a weighted blanket, and then a sharp knock breaks it. A blonde woman enters, and the air seems to still around her. This is the commander of the Blue Spear Holy Knights, and her arrival immediately makes the assembly nervous. Klein recognizes her from the sword exhibition, watching from the shadows. When a noble questions her presence, the investigator explains that Dalton performed missions for her order, giving her a vested interest. She fixes Klein with a piercing, analytical stare that makes the ancient mage inside him instinctively wary. Without wasting time, she requests a private audience. The investigator hesitates but allows it, warning the boy not to be long. Klein follows her toward a secluded room, already calculating. In the private study, the commander turns and shoves him against the wall. She wants to touch him to see the truth. Klein recalls her reputation, a living legend who single-handedly annihilated high-tier monsters, blue eyes glowing lethal as she danced through orcs with her spear. In the present, that same aura is now pressed up against him, asking to hold his hands. She takes his hand and notes aloud that his skin is as soft as a baby's, completely free of calluses or scars. Her fingers slide over his tendons with clinical precision, and she leans in close enough that he can feel her breath. Then she asks the million-dollar question. If his hands show no sword training, what power did he use to slaughter Dalton and 20 mercenaries? Clawing shoves her back, cold sweat on his neck. He realizes this woman is far more dangerous than the priest. She's not hunting a confession, she's hunting a reaction. In her world, silence is admission, and hesitation is confirmation. So he decides to go on the offensive. He flashes a mocking smile and asks her directly what she would do if he really were the legendary Necromancer. To his absolute shock, she bursts out laughing. She looks him up and down and tells him a little pipsqueak like him could never be the demon king of old. The insult lands harder than any physical blow. Klein stands there gaping, repeating the word pipsqueak in utter disbelief that the most feared necromancer in history has just been called short. He asks if she made a mistake. She confirms it without hesitation and offers to repeat herself, which she does. Deep down, Klein knows she's technically correct about his stature, which makes the emotional damage worse. Then she makes an even more absurd proposal. If he can defeat a knight without using a sword or necromancy, she'll kiss him. Klein is left speechless too, internally injured and confused to tell if this is politics, a bribe, or a personal hobby. She looks toward the horizon, says it's getting late, and adds that the legendary Archimonde would never have been this reckless or bold. When they re-enter the hall, every eye turns toward them with burning curiosity. Klein admits to himself that he underestimated the political quagmire he jumped into. He knows the nobles will never believe a no-manor boy acted in self-defense against the Count's son, so when the investigator presses for details about the private discussion, Klein ignores him, walks to a sword leaning against the wall, and drives the blade into the floor with a violent thud. The assembly goes silent. Klein turns to Count Canwell and challenges him to prove his accusations right then and there. He invokes the ancient northern tradition of trial by combat, a lawless duel where the victor is declared innocent and the loser is proven guilty. The Count is stunned, then sees the opportunity. Trial by combat is a brutal relic with no restrictions, but the Count smiles predatorily. If he can move this from courtroom to arena, he can bury the evidence of his mercenaries along with the boy. He accepts, hisses that he'll end Klein's life, and announces he'll appoint a champion. Klein smiles back, unbothered, and declares that he will be the one to finish the Count's line. With a duel set for 4 days, he knows this is only the beginning. He intends to use the Count as a stepping stone to show every last snake in the family exactly who he is, planning to tear the house down and rebuild it in his own image. In a private wing, Klein's older half-brother Dylan erupts in fury, screaming that the challenge is madness and asking if Klein understands he's gambling with his life. Klein, exhausted, says he knows and he's tired of hearing it. Dylan mentions their father already granted permission, then desperately offers to take Klein's place as champion. Klein refuses instantly. Dylan argues that as the future ruler of the North, it's his duty to protect his younger brother. Then, in a rare moment of vulnerability, Dylan recalls seeing Klein as a baby. To him, the infant looked like a beautiful angel. With tears in his eyes, he grabs Klein and begs him to reconsider. Their emotional confrontation is interrupted by a guard with urgent news. Count Canwell has already chosen his champion. Klein pulls away from his brother's grip, voice cold and focused, and asks who they'll be facing. The guard reveals the name, Randall, an excommunicated knight with a terrifying battlefield reputation. Klein names him outright. His name is Randall, and the scene cuts to a grimy tavern. The door swings open and a massive, muscular man walks in, with a gaze of pure, unbridled savagery. Randall was cast out of the knightly orders for an uncontrollable urge to slaughter everyone around him. He sits amid broken furniture and fallen bodies, drinking blood-red liquor straight from a wooden bucket with a monstrous expression. He mutters that it's been a long time since he heard a young boy scream, his anticipation for the slaughter palpable. And that is where we leave it. 4 days until Klein has to fight this man without a sword and without necromancy, or find a very creative loophole. Our boy stands there like a man who has already read the patch notes for this duel, sword in hand, face blank, main character privileges fully equipped. Meanwhile, the arena VIPs are doing that thing nobles do, where they pretend to be shocked while openly measuring the Duke for a coffin. One of them leans in and basically says, "So you actually showed up, and you're letting your no-manner son fight an Empire Knight?" Heinkel doesn't react at all, which is the aristocratic equivalent of, "I already decided this before you were born." Klein keeps walking, scanning the crowd like he's looking for a tutorial boss marker. Then the ground gets darker. Randall steps into frame with the build of a man who bench presses ogres for breakfast and places one hand on Klein's head like he's checking the expiration date. Randall grins down at him, calls him younger than he'd heard, thinner than he'd like, and wonders out loud what sound Klein's neck will make when it snaps. The usual small talk between a man and the person he's legally allowed to kill. Klein doesn't scream. He doesn't freeze. He just vanishes backward in one clean motion, leaving Randall holding nothing but the memory of where a teenager used to be. The crowd loses its mind. The noble from before turns to Heinkel with that smug, told-you-so face. Randall laughs and says Klein already looks terrified. What Klein is actually thinking. Damn, that startled me. It reminded me of when that priest grabbed my shoulder. Garrison, my man, you are living rent-free in this boy's trauma. Up in the stands, Leia Wren is watching this whole thing with the energy of someone who already called in sick to her stepmother's nonsense. A guard panics and says, "Lady Helion will be furious." Leia answers flatly, "I don't care. That woman isn't my mother anyway." Internal addendum, if Klein actually wins this, she's giving him her respect. Priorities, honestly. Klein, meanwhile, is mortified. He tries to recover with the stiffest excuse in Duel history. "I've been having a stiff neck lately," and tells Randall not to touch his shoulder. Randall reaches again anyway because some men only learn through workplace incidents. Klein snaps. "I told you not to touch me, you perverted meathead. Are your ears stuffed with muscles too? That's exactly why the Empire abandoned you." The whole arena goes quiet. Randall's smile turns feral. "Excellent. The fouler your mouth, the more you'll scream later." Randall throws a punch that could restructure a mountain. Klein calmly unbuttons his coat, and in the next frame, Randall's fist is buried in shattered stone, while Klein is already across the arena, holding a short sword. The coat was a decoy. My man just nope out of a boss hit with wardrobe mechanics. Spectators are doing the math, and none of it adds up. He dodged, but how does he win? One graze shatters bones. He's walking to his death. Klein just thinks, direct clash is bad, one hit ends me, and I cannot afford to take this easy. Then Randall stops playing. He rushes, Klein swings, Randall catches the blade with his bare hand and sends Klein sliding backward. The difference in raw stats is not subtle. Randall keeps pressing, mocking him for dodging, daring him to use necromancy. Aren't you the great Archimonde? Klein isn't smiling because he's happy. He's smiling because he's annoyed enough to consider raising the entire arena as a retirement plan. Randall looks into his eyes, feels something his brain can't name, and steps back in pure instinct. Sweat is running down a face that was confident 30 seconds ago. The noble sponsor up top is furious. Why is Randall acting like that? Klein steps forward and says it out loud. Don't worry, I won't use necromancy. Because I am a Rhineland. The crowd doesn't know whether to cheer or call a therapist. They settle on cheering. Randall loads mana into his blade until the air around it looks sharp enough to cut gravity. Imperial swordsmanship, one burst. All senses maxed, hunt the opponent in an instant. He comes in screaming, and Klein dodges again. Then Klein says, almost bored, I can see it. Your technique, your mana, the arc of your blade, all of it, obvious as a damn fly. Randall doubles down. The next strike is twice as heavy, and when it lands, the arena disappears behind dust and shockwaves. Everyone squints. Randall can't believe it. From the smoke, Klein steps into his blind spot and says the line, with a body that size, your back is completely exposed. The narration steps in to explain the matchup. Rhineland swordsmanship is minimum mana, maximum efficiency, built to survive the frozen north. Imperial swordsmanship is predation, overwhelmed with one burst. Klein is fighting a predator using a style designed to outlast winter itself. Randall finally pops his secret technique, a mana burst that seals movement. The air gets heavy enough to bend knees. He roars that he'll win and comes down like a meteor. Klein blocks head-on, and the sword, the one forged to shatter against mana-infused steel, shatters exactly on cue. Randall starts laughing. Serves you right, Klein, your sword is, but Klein smiles. Yeah, now it's finally complete. The weapon to hunt you. He steps inside Randall's range with the broken blade and slashes point blank. Randall's arm comes clean off. The duel is over. Healers rush in panicking. Klein watches and asks, almost disappointed, if the arm can be reattached. They say no, it'll need a prosthetic. Klein replies, oh really, is that all? Inside he's thinking, even after 200 years, healing magic hasn't advanced much. Subtle, my dude. Real subtle. Heinkel calls out to him, asks if he feels nothing after seeing a severed limb. Klein's face shifts. Right. I'm not Archimonde anymore. He walks away calm, internally debating whether he should pretend to be scared now. Method acting is exhausting when you've actually done worse. Count Canwell finally snaps. He rants that Randall's loss makes no sense, that he lost his son and his knight. Heinkel cuts in cold, as agreed. Admit your wrongdoing and fulfill the winner's demands. Canwell tries to weasel out, and then Klein looks at him. For one split second, Canwell's head looks severed. Everyone freezes. Then the illusion breaks. It's the voice of the dead. A necromancer technique that summons terror, not blades. Canwell collapses, sobbing, confessing that he and his son tried to harm Klein and insulted Grand Duchess Claire. A spectator stares in disbelief. A pillar of the Branch family crumbling like wet paper. Klein raises his broken sword and makes his declaration. He is the challenger and rightful victor, son of Grand Duchess Claire Radelesis, second son of the North's strongest knight, Heinkel Rhineland. He's Klein Rhineland. The name lands like a title card. The scene cuts to a quiet hall. Garrison enters. Cardinal Morrow is praying. Garrison reports that the surveillance target was attacked by a necromancer and undead. He needs to verify it personally. Morrow says don't bother. It was part of the plan. The Empire sent them. Morrow keeps going. Necromancers incite fear. Fear drives people to God. A few sacrifices revive the order. Garrison grabs him by the throat, calls him a servant of the temple who sold out to heretics, and crushes his skull. Blood across the hall. The church's hours department is not handling this well. Another man steps through the blood. Archbishop Palamine. He mocks Garrison for killing more clergymen than necromancers. Garrison asks if this was his doing. Palamine says no. He merely authorized it. Then he adds that he brought information about the surveillance target. Garrison tries to punch Palamine. Palamine vanishes and reappears elsewhere, effortless. He holds up a cross-shaped relic containing necromantic traces, one from soul return magic the Empire is researching, and another from the original form of necromancy that manipulates souls directly. 2 necromancers were at the scene. Palamine looks Garrison in the eyes and delivers the last line. Listen carefully, Garrison. Your surveillance target, the second son of the Rhineland family. Klein Rhineland is a necromancer. Cut. That is the sound of a cliffhanger landing with both feet. We pick up after the trial by combat, and the first thing we see is Aaron clutching a stitched-up doll of Klein's face like it's a hostage negotiation. Klein is just sitting there reading, pretending this is a normal Tuesday, while his maid commits crimes against craft projects. A week has passed since he beat Randall with the family technique, extracted Count Canwell's confession using the dead man's voice, and announced himself to the branch families. He thought recognition would feel better, but the real boss fight turns out to be stamina management on a 15-year-old body. Erin calls him out for always playing alone, but Klein's so-called novel is actually a grimoire packed with anatomy notes, magic circuits, and spell formations. His internal patch notes are brutal. Current summon cap is 11 skeletons. Control is stable, but a war of attrition is not happening with those numbers. The bigger problem is Priest Garrison, who is basically running a zero-tolerance policy on anything that smells like necromancy. Klein needs his original power back, but he has to farm experience points without getting caught by his own household or that priest. Heinkel shows up with a report about undead sightings at a mine, and the second Klein hears the word undead. His eyes do that thing they do when opportunity knocks. His father asks about the casualties and whether he'll be all right, and Klein answers with the confidence of a man who has already decided the undead are his study material. Internally, Klein is already celebrating. Heinkel recognizes him now, and a mine full of undead is the perfect solo necromancy lab. Of course, the Duke orders Dunkel to tag along for safety, because nothing says covert necromancy research like a grey-haired bodyguard chaperone. Out of the campsite, Dunkel is cheerful, relaxed, and catastrophically bad at cooking, which Klein discovers when he is handed what can only be described as a lump of charcoal. Klein learns a key fact on this mission. His personal bodyguard is completely useless at domestic skills, and Dunkel is so embarrassed he can't even make eye contact. Klein tells him to just eat, and he'll handle the grilling, while internally noting that a decade on the run from night orders has made Dunkel weirdly durable. The campfire mood shifts when Dunkel says Klein feels different from other kids his age, hiding his sword talent and that trial by combat spirit. Then Dunkel says the quiet part out loud. Sometimes he thinks Klein might actually be the reincarnation of Archimonde. Klein's expression instantly changes, and the campfire flares up like it also heard the forbidden name and decided to panic. He coldly warns Dunkel to never speak of that in front of the priest, and Dunkel quickly backpedals, reminding them both that Archimonde was the devil who turned millions of northerners into undead. Before either of them can recover, screams tear through the night from a nearby village, and the undead are already chasing panicked townsfolk through the streets. Dunkel charges in first and starts cutting down undead like it's a speedrun, but Klein is already right behind him, calmly clearing the rest of the path. Klein tells Dunkel to stop showing off and go save the people, and for once Dunkel actually listens without arguing. They clean house together, undead after undead, until the village is finally quiet again and the survivors are just standing there in disbelief. Dunkel proudly introduces Klein as the second young lord of the Rhineland family, and the villagers react like he just announced a celebrity tax audit. Dunkel asks when the undead started appearing, and a villager explains it was right after Count Canwell's family restricted access to the mine, which is exactly when people started vanishing too. Klein realizes the reanimation magic is the same technique used by the thing that attacked him in the forest before, which means this outbreak is not random. Then the villager drops the worst part. These undead are all residents of the village, and Klein's face finally cracks open with genuine shock. A breathing man grabs Klein by the clothes and screams that they begged Rhineland for help for 2 months and got silence, and the undead Klein just cut down was his father. Klein stands there while the name Archmond echoes in his head, and his irritation finally surfaces as he tells the man to shut up and blame the right target. Flames start rising from his hand, and before Dunkel can step in, Klein begins a solemn incantation to guide the trapped souls instead of commanding them as soldiers. He declares himself Klein Rhineland and vows to uphold their will, and glowing blue souls begin drifting up out of the undead bodies all across the village. The villagers are speechless as someone recognizes the rite as a technique used 200 years ago during the Northern Plague to liberate the dead. One of the freed spirits points toward the mine and tells Klein the way, and he quietly answers that he understands in a language only the dead seem to share. Dunkel finally asks what Klein talked about with the spirits, and Klein brushes it off as gratitude and the request for revenge. The word revenge hangs in the air, and Dunkel remembers the campfire conversation where Klein snapped at him for mentioning Archimonde. His suspicion hardens into certainty, and in one sudden motion he draws his sword and presses the blade against Klein's neck, asking the one question that changes everything. We drop into a flashback where the Rhineland estate is gossiping itself into a panic, and the main topic is a child whose stare has more emotional vacancy than a cancelled gacha server's login screen. Servants find dead cats around the grounds, kitchen, garden, one a day, until the count hits 7, and naturally the conclusion is dark magic, because nobody in a noble house has ever heard of a contagious disease. The whispers pile up fast. His mother's bloodline, the monastery, the name Archimonde, the kid is basically wearing every red flag in the noble horror bingo card, and the estate is one bad night away from a torch mob. Young Klein, meanwhile, does absolutely nothing to reassure anyone. He just stares out windows in silence, cosplaying as the protagonist of a psychological thriller, while the staff quietly updates their resumes. Dunkel, bless him, tries to play defense. He's too young, probably unrelated, but even he looks like a man who just realized his job description now includes chaperone to a possible apocalypse. That midnight, Dunkel spots Klein slipping through the halls with a lantern and decides to follow at a distance, which is the exact energy of a horror movie side character who absolutely should not investigate the noise. Klein leads him straight to the family cemetery, because of course the suspected necromancer's midnight walk ends at a graveyard. The Manhwa is not even pretending to be subtle at this point. He finally gets a clear look and freezes. Klein is kneeling among the 7 dead cats, not summoning anything, just quietly arranging them like he's prepping for the saddest funeral in Gothic literature history. The twist is almost unfair. The cats died of an infectious disease harmless to humans, but fatal to animals. And Klein is out here at midnight handling infected corpses with his bare hands because nobody else would do it. Dunkel tells him he'll ruin his hands and they should call someone else. And Klein just shakes his head and says it's a job someone has to do, calm, sincere, and somehow more haunting than if he'd actually raised the cats from the dead. The flashback fades, and we are back in the present with Klein and Dunkel standing in an underground passage where the air tastes like corpses and bad decisions. Dunkel now has his sword against Klein's neck because nothing says bonded through trauma like a friendly throat blade, and he demands to know exactly who he's been serving all this time. Klein doesn't flinch. He asks Dunkel if he remembers Berkel Rhineland's first maxim, that a being is defined by actions, not roots, and you can practically hear the dramatic trial music swelling from somewhere off-panel. Cloyne points out that the same maxim is why a poor peasant became a knight commander and why a foreign mother's son is still alive, then tells Dunkel that since he spent the most time with him, he gets to decide. The sword stays there for several agonizing seconds before Dunkel finally pulls it away, admitting he hasn't decided and isn't convinced. But the person he serves is the second young master of Rhineland, not some atrocious devil of the continent. They press deeper into the ruins, the cold getting heavier, the darkness thicker, until Dunkel lights a torch and the walls reveal what they've been walking through, a cathedral of bones and stacked skeletons that redefines bad feng shui. Klein counts 7 hostiles moving, estimates more further in, and starts chanting like, "This is just another Tuesday," calling the dead to rise, giving them flesh to crush enemies, and generally doing things that are not on the approved Rhineland extracurricular list. The battle erupts in the narrow chamber. Bones shatter, rusted blades collide, and Klein's summoned skeletons tear into the hostile undead with the kind of coordination that makes Dunkel question every military academy he ever attended. Klein glances over with the smallest hint of amusement and mentions that an Elton mercenary said the same thing, then asks if it's really that fascinating, in the tone of a tour guide who's seen this reaction 1,000 times. Deeper in, the sound suggests around 40 more hostiles, and Dunkel does the math out loud. We're outnumbered, which is usually the part where the sidekick suggests retreat. He releases the bindings on the defeated undead, converts subdued enemies into allies, and explains to a stunned Dunkel that this is basic Necromancer versus Necromancer tactics, the fantasy equivalent of capturing your opponent's pieces in chess. Vanguard charges forward. The skeletons move like disciplined soldiers, and Klein and Dunkel advance behind their own private undead legion through corridors that keep vomiting more grotesque corpses at them. The battle snowballs until every hostile undead in the chamber is annihilated, and Dunkel stares at the destruction, realizing they just wiped out a force more than 4 times their size with an army that doesn't eat, sleep, or unionize. Cloyne reminds Dunkel that he said he'd trust him, then tells him to trust him until the very end, which is a beautiful line that also translates to, "Please do not panic when the next horror drops." Cloyne identifies them as the missing villagers, kidnapped and used as raw materials for reanimation magic, and the casual way he says it makes the whole scene feel even worse. This is a man who has seen this exact atrocity before. She explains, with the pride of a TED Talk speaker, that reanimation magic requires a massive quantity of high-quality bodies. Basic knowledge among necromancers, she says, like she's discussing sourdough starter ratios. For the first time, genuine shock cracks across Klein's face, not because she's wrong, but because someone in the present just said it out loud with total certainty. Then the story pauses to deliver a history lesson with teeth. Necromancers used to be corpse diviners who consulted the dead for prophecies, not monsters, until the Archimonde incident happened and ruined the brand for everyone. Cities fell, kingdoms collapsed, and the war only ended when the hero Berkel Rhineland finally cut down Archimonde, which is the single most awkward family tree fact Klein has ever had to live with. Back in the present, the crimson-haired necromancer greets him like an old colleague and says it's been a while, Lord Archimonde, at which point Dunkel's entire nervous system short-circuits in real time. The necromancer laughs it off as a joke, but Klein isn't laughing. He notes the strange demonic energy he felt earlier and the rumors about her, then zeroes in on her robe. She's infused it with mana, something only a specific group can do. Dunkel demands answers about the villagers and who put her up to this, but the necromancer ignores him completely and raises her hand to deliver a lecture on true necromancy. Dark magic erupts from her body, the hanging corpses twitch and twist, bones crack, flesh warps, and the whole chamber starts trembling like it's trying to unsubscribe from whatever is happening. Something massive begins emerging from the darkness. First an enormous hand, then legs that shake the ceiling with every step, until the full form resolves into a one-eyed giant that Dunkel identifies, with appropriate horror, as a cyclops. The Cyclops charges with terrifying speed for something the size of a building, and Dunkel shoves Klein aside before the impact sends him flying across the chamber, because Dunkel's loyalty stat is maxed even when his survival instinct is not. Dunkel gets between them and swings with everything he has, landing a strike that would cleave a normal monster in half, and the Necromancer calmly calls it a splendid strike, then adds that he can't even leave a scratch on her masterpiece. Dunkel keeps attacking faster and harder, refusing to stop even when every slash eels in seconds. The shame of having suspected Klein of being the continent's arch-necromancer now fuels him harder than any battle cry could. The Cyclops eventually swats him into a wall, and Dunkel crumples in terrible shape, at which point the Necromancer turns to her creation with the tenderness of a mother and says she is deeply moved. She screams that this is innate talent, that not even Klein could create something like this, while the Cyclops lifts Dunkel's broken body and prepares to crush him completely. Klein walks toward the monster without fear, lecturing as he goes. The core suture is why the limbs regenerate. It's the source of its regenerative power, and attacking the body directly is exactly the pointless strategy the Necromancer wanted them to use. Klein ignores her panic and keeps walking, because he has slaughtered thousands of Cyclops across countless battlefields in a previous life, and that kind of experience points does not come with a respec option. A single flash cuts the darkness. His attack pierces the Cyclops' moving core with absolute precision, and the core shatters before the Necromancer can finish another sentence. The Necromancer stares in complete disbelief and asks, voice trembling, what exactly he is, which is the question everyone in this story keeps circling back to, and nobody wants answered. So we're opening this chapter with the classic philosophical question, is death just sleep, or is it a customer service refund on your entire life's karma? The Necromancer, the Crimson Necromancer from the mine, is currently dead, which you'd think would be a permanent status effect. Her eyes snap open anyway because this story does not respect the game over screen. She stands up in a void full of floating coffins and asks the reasonable tourist question, what is this place? The answer, delivered by a voice that sounds like it bills by the hour, is simple. It's the afterlife. Patch notes just dropped for your mortality. Necromancer is, understandably, not vibing with this. She demands to be let out. The silhouetted figure informs her that wanting to leave means she still doesn't understand the situation, which is a very polite way of saying the tutorial is not optional. Then the voice drops the actual bomb. Shall we begin the judgment of your sins? The Necromancer's face shifts from confused tourist to person who just realized the customs officer found the contraband. The judge names himself in the name of Arkham and Klein. The Necromancer's brain immediately blue screens. Arkham, the name in the Necromancer textbooks. The devil of the continent. The beginning and end of all necromancy. The guy whose army of the dead had its own zip code. Klein tells her to come closer, and the Necromancer's body obeys before her brain can file an appeal. This is not a negotiation. This is a forced cutscene, and she is the non-player character who chose violence in the main quest. The charges are read like a villain resume. You kidnapped and tortured innocent people as tools. You bound them so they couldn't die, all for your own desires. Every word lands like a personal attack because technically it is one. The Necromancer panics and grabs her own face because the alternative is accepting that the monster under every Necromancer's bed is real and currently filing paperwork on her. She screams that Archimond is dead. Wasn't he dead? Reader, he was not. Black liquid drips onto her hand. A coffin drifts overhead. Klein informs her that since she used the dead as tools, she will now become his tool. The floating coffin opens like a job offer she absolutely cannot decline. The Necromancer asks what "become my tool" even means, but the Force answers by dragging her into the coffin. The lid slams shut. Klein raises his weapon and strikes it hard, then tells her they'll meet again soon. Customer service rating, 1 star. Then the Necromancer wakes up screaming in the actual mine, tears streaming, fully alive and immediately disappointed about it. The fight is still going. Archimonde is also waking up, looking around and muttering the single most relatable line in this chapter. Unbelievable line in this chapter. Unbelievable. Dunkel's internal math is not mathing. He was unconscious for a moment, and now the necromancer is defeated, the mine is wrecked, and his young master is just standing there like he finished a side quest during a loading screen. The necromancer, still on the ground, asks why she is like this. Klein kneels beside her and notes that she's finally coming to her senses. Behind him, the shadow of Archimond looms. The rumors, it turns out, were not just rumors. The necromancer blurts out the obvious. "You're Archimonde." Klein shushes her with a finger to her lips and a flat, "Quiet now." The atmosphere shifts. Same soul, different body, identical customer service energy. Then Klein flits from horror icon to interrogator. "Who sent you north? How many? Where? When? Why? Talk." And he promises a painless death. Refuse, and he grants eternal life. The way he smiles while saying it makes both options sound worse. The necromancer asks what eternal life means. Klein clarifies, "You'll stay beheaded forever. Let's see how long you last." This is the kind of hours policy that gets a company featured in a viral expose. Dunkel writes everything down like a good administrative assistant to the apocalypse. Klein says it's time to leave. The necromancer panics. "What about me?" She did everything he asked. Klein smiles creepily and remembers, oh right, he did promise to kill her. Tears of relief fall from the necromancer's eyes. Finally, she can die. Klein gathers energy and assures her he never breaks a promise. Then he casts a spell and informs her she just has to wait about a week. The fine print is always where they get you. Behind the necromancer, dozens of cockroaches scurry toward her. Klein says they'll take care of killing her. They swarm her face. Her body is helpless. Klein and Dunkel walk away while the necromancer screams Archimonde's name in pain and rage, and Klein waves goodbye like he just finished a casual brunch. Back at the estate, Heinkel sits at his desk reading Klein's report. The Empire released necromancers into the north, and the Holy Order looked the other way. Heinkel's face says this is the worst quarterly report he's ever seen. Klein confirms the details. About 150 undead, nearly 30 missing villagers, probably worse elsewhere. Heinkel orders Butler Berkman to dispatch knights to every location Klein named and asks about border reinforcements. Better than doing nothing, he says, which is the most Duke-coded sentence ever spoken. Heinkel tells Klein he did something great. Klein deflects it was luck. If Dunkel hadn't been there, he'd be dead. Internally, Klein decides the situation is too complicated and he and Dunkel need to keep the necromancy secret, which is a bold strategy after just using it as a PowerPoint presentation. Heinkel pulls a token from his desk drawer. This is the token of a Rhineland knight. From now on, Klein starts as an apprentice knight. Klein smiles and says it's more than enough. Heinkel is pleased. Then he tells his son to go rest, because even necromancer prodigies need a nap. After Klein leaves, Berkman reads the report aloud. Over 70 regular undead, a giant type, and an armed necromancer, with Commander Dunkel's combat support. Heinkel cuts him off. Send a letter to his brother. Tell him the genius he spent his whole life looking for is here. That's one way to CC someone into a family group chat. Klein walks out with his hands in his pockets, internally celebrating. Now he's an apprentice knight. Unlike the public-facing ducal residence, the knight barracks are a classified military zone. Even Garrison can't enter without permission. Klein is one lockable door away from his least favorite priest. Klein thinks Garrison probably still suspects him and is itching to perform another purification ritual. He's right. Before he can finish planning his next move, Erin grabs him from behind, shouting his name. Klein asks if she ran out of cookies or if he broke her 7th vertebra. Erin puffs out her cheeks. Cookies are not the only thing she cares about, young master. Klein tells her to get more cookies from the kitchen if she wants. Then Erin delivers the actual message. Priest Garrison is here. Every painful memory Klein has of Garrison comes rushing back. Before he can process, Garrison's voice comes from behind him. Did your mission go well, young master? Klein breaks out in a cold sweat. The lockable door plan has failed immediately. We flash back to a younger Klein hiding from servants, who is shouting his name across an open field. It's purification ritual day, and he has vanished, which is the most relatable scheduling conflict a child necromancer can have. A servant warns that Father Garrison is very angry and will forgive him if he comes out now. Klein, crouched in a tree, smirks and decides they can search all night. Night falls. Klein sits alone, tells everyone to get lost in his head, and then startles awake. He figures the servants gave up and he should head back. Then he sees it. A northern grey bear the size of a wall, drooling with one burning yellow eye and a very clear interest in him. Klein notes that without necromancy, he is nothing but a meal to these things. He crouches and waits, then his thoughts spiral. He gave everything for northerners who died without justice, got reborn into the family of the man who killed him, and even now, his life is just running away. Heavy stuff for a bear encounter. The memory shifts. Hooded figures scream that Archimond is there and swarm toward a small child under the night sky. Two shadowy watchers observe from above. One says, "That child." The other says, "They say he is cursed." Below them, Klein stands alone, pale and tiny against all that darkness, whispering that it's freezing. Then, Priest Garrison appears beside him, asking if Klein froze to death. Klein wonders if this is hell. Garrison laughs and says of course not. He found Klein unconscious in a tree and brought him here. The bears are already dealt with. Klein's response is immediate and bitter. Put him down. He'd rather die than be carried by Garrison. Garrison ignores the tantrum and notes Klein is burning up with fever. Klein asks why Garrison even saved him. If he'd been left there, he'd have frozen or been eaten. Wasn't Garrison the one who wanted him dead most of all? Garrison pauses. Then he says something that does not sound like the man Klein thinks he knows. Garrison says stars do not create their own darkness. They merely shine in their own place. Young lives do not yet know right from wrong. The panel cuts to three small bear cubs tumbling in the grass, one sitting on the others with a literal question mark above its head. The cutest possible visual aid for a moral philosophy lecture. Garrison finishes, the future of a young being, and he has no right to cut off that potential. Klein stares at him, unreadable, and asks if that's really something Garrison should be saying to him right now. Garrison pauses again. Then he says, however, the word hangs in the air like a death flag with excellent timing. Garrison says if that being chooses to become darkness itself, and if Klein is the true Archimond he has been looking for, then he will kill Klein with his own hands. The threat lands quietly. No yelling. No holy fire. Just a man stating terms. It's somehow worse. We cut back to the present. Butler Berkman greets Garrison, who says it's been a while indeed. Garrison explains he had urgent business at the Order. He holds up a cross-shaped vial filled with dark red liquid. Klein's face says he recognizes the item and does not like where this is going. Something in the air shifts. Garrison's demeanor changes from polite church visitor to field agent who has finally found the right paperwork. He says if it were just soul-returning art to control corpses, he might just report it to the Order. The implication being, it's not just that. Klein internally rules out copying Garrison's technique. No, it's impossible. He'd have to survive seeing it first, and he has no confidence in that. Then the fight begins anyway. Energy erupts. The estate becomes a war zone between a priest and a teenager who is technically also a 200-year-old war criminal. Fast mode. Garrison presses forward with holy energy blazing. Klein barely keeps his feet. Dunkel tries to intervene, but gets thrown around like a side character in his own fight. The estate walls start cracking. This is no longer a purification ritual. This is a boss raid with one healer and no tank. Klein considers copying Garrison's technique again, then immediately rejects it. He needs to survive the first demonstration, and survival is not currently on the menu. Garrison closes the distance. Years, he says, as if the word itself is a weapon. Garrison's fury finally breaks the surface. He has spent years hunting this exact thing. Klein tries to push back, declaring he'll decide who he becomes, but Garrison is not interested in the protagonist's speech. He hurls Klein across the hall with a blast that rearranges the furniture and probably the architectural blueprints. A bystander shouts the obvious in pure horror. The priest is attacking the young lord. Yes, he is, and he is winning. Garrison holds up Klein's own sword and asks if he's looking for this. Klein is thrown again. The gap in power is not subtle. It's a canyon with a welcome sign. Klein manages a counter-slash, but Garrison no-sells it like a raid boss with elemental resistance. The clash sends shockwaves through the estate. Klein is running on spite and last resort energy at this point. Garrison asks coldly if Klein is really Archimonde. Klein answers with defiance. He'll decide who he becomes. Garrison is done talking. He lunges. A massive scarred figure, reinforcements or another combatant, arrives shouting that here he comes. The fight becomes a three-way scramble. Klein is launched backward through speed lines, still conscious, still angry, still somehow not dead. Klein grits his teeth and charges back in. He will not stay down. He will not let Garrison end this on Garrison's terms. The panel gives us the classic shonen lunge with rain/motion lines. Unfortunately, Garrison has seen this anime before and is not impressed. Klein pushes forward through holy energy, eyes sharp, practically screaming that he is the protagonist. Garrison meets him head-on. The collision is the kind that makes structural engineers cry. Klein is outmatched, out-leveled, and out of polite options. Just as Garrison's attack descends, a new presence snaps into the frame. Heinkel Rhineland arrives, Meteor sword drawn, and the entire fight pauses like someone hit the pause button on a cutscene. The Duke does not look happy. The Duke looks like a man whose house is being renovated without permission. Garrison reacts with visible shock as Heinkel intercepts. Klein somehow announces that he did it, as if he planned this entire father-son tag team. He did not. Heinkel's arrival is the only reason this fight is no longer a funeral. The aftermath is bloody. A Holy Order soldier is blasted apart. The estate grounds are in ruins. Bystanders stare in disbelief. Garrison stands amid the wreckage, still dangerous, still not done. He points at Klein and says, "And you." The sentence does not need to finish. Everyone knows what he means. Garrison tells his people to hurry. Heinkel steps fully into the scene, sword gleaming, and the two authority figures face each other. The fight is no longer Klein versus Garrison. It is House Rhineland versus the Holy Order, and the only thing missing is a referee. Garrison makes one more move, but Heinkel is already there. The clash is enormous. Klein is blown backward by the shockwave, because when two adults fight, the teenager should really be somewhere else. The chapter ends on the unresolved standoff, father, priest, and a son who is somehow both. Heinkel Rhineland opens the conversation like a man who has already decided the verdict, asking Garrison to explain himself before the sword does it for him. Klein watches from the side with the expression of someone whose poker face is doing overtime, while Delane mutters that this is exactly what he expected, and Garrison looks like he just tasted something bitter. The household is not having a quiet day. Armored guards are moving. Dunkel is having the worst guard shift of his life. And Klein is smiling, like he already read the patch notes for this encounter. Garrison lays it out flat. The young master used necromancy. And surely the Duke knows what that means. Heinkel counters with continent-wide law, which is a fancy way of saying, "Not in my house, agent." Then Heinkel drops the actual payload. Klein suffered 7 years over a baseless rumor, and he will not let anyone lay a hand on his son again. The word son lands like a sword strike in its own right. Garrison does not flinch. He warns Heinkel to suppress his bloodlust, unless he wants Rhineland as an enemy, then breaks into laughter that sounds like it escaped from a much darker room than this one. He recites doctrine like a man deleting his own mercy settings. No shame in faith, no trust in the tongue of an unbeliever. Show no mercy to the heretic. The room's temperature drops about 40 degrees. Golden light erupts. Heinkel meets it with his blade. The two of them turn a perfectly good mansion into a demolition site, and the knights discover that standing near this fight is a genuine health hazard. Garrison's fists glow with holy energy. The knights try to surge in and get swatted back like flies. Someone shouts that the mansion is collapsing, which feels less like a warning and more like a status update at this point. Cloyne dives into the chaos, trading a shock wave with Garrison. Heinkel delivers a final warning to lower his fist. Garrison answers by calling this divine judgment and driving his foot through the floor. Hinkle tosses his coat aside, which in anime means the fight just got serious. Garrison loads a strike of condemnation. Heinkel's eyes sharpen, blood appears at the corner, and the Rhineland's secret technique finally awakens. Meteor sword, second form. The blade falls like a star, and the rest of the architecture files for unemployment. Even the knights and Dunkel are pushed back by the sheer pressure of the Duke going all out. Cloyne watches his father literally weaponize the sky and thinks, with the calm of a man whose plans are unraveling, that things are getting complicated. Then a small voice cuts through the dust. Erin walks into the middle of a collapsed mansion and asks both world-ending combatants to please stop, because she has priorities, and they do not involve structural engineering. Dunkel panics. The knights freeze. Garrison's hand goes still. Erin looks up at him with the full force of childhood expectation and says 2 words that stop a holy war, Father Garrison. She wants her present. She lists the cookies. She reminds him that heaven punishes liars. Cloyne watches this and decides that being this oblivious to atmosphere is basically a superpower. Garrison, standing in the wreckage of his own righteous rampage, quietly admits he did promise. He pulls out a box of cookies from a famous bakery, and the undying king's existential crisis gets paused by a 9-year-old snack break. Erin asks about Garrison's share, and the man who just tried to delete a Duke house explains that where he grew up, even water was scarce. The place was called the Archimonde cult. Cloyne's internal monologue short-circuits. Archimonde cult, did I make that? No memory of it in either life. Garrison says he will end everything connected to Archimonde, even at the cost of his own life, and offers Erin his cookie share with a smile that does not reach his eyes. Garrison turns to Cloyne, says it will not end like this, and walks into the dust. Cloyne exhales and realizes he has made an enemy of Garrison Berkman, which is roughly the worst subscription service on the continent. Erin offers him a cookie. He jumps, recovers, and bribes her with strawberry cake, so he can finally have the private conversation this entire disaster was supposed to be about. Inside, under a chandelier that somehow survived, Heinkel asks the question, did Cloyne learn necromancy? Cloyne says yes without blinking. Heinkel's voice tightens. Why, of all things, necromancy? Cloyne lies smoothly. He learned it from the books in his mother's annex. Heinkel freezes at Claire's name. Cloyne privately admits it is the most believable excuse he has given his background. He refuses to make excuses for hiding it, but says necromancy was his only way to survive. Heinkel argues swordsmanship alone could have been enough. Cloyne tells him to read Dunkel's report, no mana, near-death fights, monsters, impossible odds. The Empire is using necromancers to eat away at the North, and nobody suspected it. Cloyne pushes harder, use him as Rhineland's necromancer, or watch the family fall. Heinkel has to decide now. Heinkel does not answer immediately. Instead, he remembers Cloyne coming home from the Correctional Institute after 7 years, saying, "I'm home, father," with no resentment at all. Heinkel calls himself a pathetic father who failed to protect Cloyne's future. Cloyne says he was just excited to finally be free. Heinkel turns away and gives the only answer he has left, do as you wish. Permission granted, the story cuts to a different battlefield. A monstrous human is slaughtering mercenaries, shrugging off attacks and laughing while he does it. The scene has side quest boss energy. The mercenaries break. One charges in desperation and gets punched into the next county. Another runs and gets a rock thrown through his chest. The monster picks up a slab of stone and finds 2 children hiding. The boy tells his sister he is scared. The sister can only beg for someone to save them. The monster tells them to stop crying because they are about to die, which is objectively the worst comfort line ever written. Li Ren appears from behind the monster like a spear-wielding comet, knocks him away, and gets the children out. The monster turns, grins through the blood, and tells her she is strong. The fight begins. They exchange blows at speed that makes the camera sweat. Li Ren takes control, corners him, and drives her spear through his chest. A witness says this is already the third time this month. But the monster is still alive, impaled and smiling. He says anyone can become strong, as long as they have that. Even stronger than Archimonde from 200 years ago. Li Ren's face says she is not amused by the comparison. Back at the Rhineland estate, Klein is buried in books with Aaron, while Dunkel asks why he needs so many anatomy texts. Klein calls it a spirit construction formula. Dunkel's brain immediately blues-greens. Klein explains that his necromancy is unique. Most souls can only manage skeletons, but stronger souls can become more complex undead. He is not planning to make one anytime soon, which is exactly what someone planning to make one says. Then an invitation arrives from Paul Weaven, the Wyvern estate. Gordon, the Wyvern chief butler, delivers it with mustache-powered formality. The household notes that Grand Duchess Julian married into the collateral branch and cut ties, but she is still Hankel's older sister, which makes this summons very hard to refuse. Klein decides to go, but first, he has unfinished family business. He descends into the crypt with Delane, lantern in hand, and stands before his grandfather's sarcophagus asking forgiveness for the disrespect he is about to commit. He begins the incantation. Cyan light floods the crypt. The spell calls upon the unfortunate soul bound by the deeds of his past life, and the stone coffin answers with a sound like the world cracking open. A translucent, blue-white hand reaches through the void. Rudel Rhineland manifests as a spectral death knight, flame-like hair, glowing yellow eye, and enough raw presence to make the crypt feel crowded. Coin explains the two paths. Subjugate a soul with overwhelming demonic energy, or bind it through a mutual contract. The harder path, the one that requires the summoned party to actually agree. Rudel recognizes the soul wearing his grandson's face as the arch-nemesis of the Rhinelands and immediately tests him with a glowing sword the size of a personal grudge. The contract negotiation is off to a violent start. They clash in a void of jagged blue crystal. Rudel's phantom sword technique comes out, duplicates and all, and Klein has to prove he can stand against the strongest duke in Rhineland history without getting folded into a pretzel. The fight keeps escalating. Klein gets knocked around, gets back up, and finally lands purple energy counters that make Rudel take him seriously. Delane, caught in the blast radius, asks why Klein would do that to him. Brotherhood is complicated. Rudel presses harder. Klein keeps answering. Eventually, the old duke sees enough. He stops, faces Klein, and speaks the words that seal the deal: accept your contract. Klein activates the magic circle. Cyan light binds them. Rudel Rhineland is now a death knight in full service, standing behind Klein in dark armor, ready to go pay respects to a very suspicious aunt. The episode closes with Klein and his new undead grandfather heading toward the Wyvern estate, while Aaron sleeps uneasily, sensing that the young lord has been doing something at night that is definitely not what the household thinks it is. We pick up right where things got messy, a violet energy surge behind Klein, Delane bracing nearby, and the whole room deciding it does not have enough exits. Klein just stares down at a letter like it personally owes him money. Classic, I already know this is a trap face. Dunkel reports that the library is organized and Klein immediately rewards that hard work by announcing they are leaving for Falweaven in 3 days. No vacation, just politics with worse weather. Dunkel reads the fine print and realizes the invitation explicitly bars him from coming, which is exactly how you know the hostess is planning something rude. Klein floats his backup plan. If Helian's people get frisky, he will just necromancy them into tearing each other apart. No big deal. Dunkel, a man who still owns a sense of honor, asks the obvious question, how is that any different from the villains they are fighting? Klein fires back that terrible people deserve terrible things, and that clinging to knight honor in a broken world is basically cosplay with extra steps. Dunkel does not budge. A Rhineland knight does not abandon faith or honor for survival or profit. Full stop. Klein asks if honor really means that much, and Dunkel looks him dead in the eye and says it matters more than anything in the world. No notes, no irony, just night brain at full volume. That night, the training ground is all full moon and blue fire because Klein has decided to power level before the trip, and his sparring partner is a towering spirit made of cold rage. Klein reads the spirit's opening thrust, parries, and the shockwave kicks up dust, the 3 postal codes. This is not a tutorial, boss. The spirit pauses, genuinely impressed that a kid with 0 mana is swinging a sword like he downloaded the entire Rhineland syllabus overnight. Klein's secret is not raw talent, it is forensic obsession. He has memorized the mechanics of Delane of Dalton and Heinkel's garrison, then stitched them together in real time like a fighting game combo video. The spirit calls him full of openings, then drops an overhead strike that explodes the ground into blue fire, except Klein is already above it, silhouetted against the moon like a man who planned the whole shot. The spirit whips around with a spinning counter, Klein blocks and skids back, and the thing admits out loud that a 0-mana kid just parried everything it threw. Sweating but smug, Klein compliments the spirit's decent talent and drops its real name, Rudel Rhineland, the 6th Duke. Strongest knight on the continent, back when continents had standards. The blue flames peel back to reveal a towering armored man with long blonde hair, a heavy sword, and the exact energy of someone who invented a sword style too hard for his own kids to learn. Rudel asks if Klein has been having fun playing house as Heinkel's kid, then roasts Heinkel for being so oblivious he would probably pass out on the spot if he learned the truth. Archimonde mentally notes that legendary former dukes talk a lot like street thugs, and that Heinkel definitely inherited the cluelessness from his father. Rudel laughs and admits that with that attitude, Klein might actually share the bloodline, then warns him that playtime is over and activates the phantom sword. The air fills with a dozen illusory blades at once, every swing a fake except one, and Klein cannot trust his eyes. This is the technique that died out because it was too difficult to teach. Klein guesses wrong, gets clipped from the left, then misreads the follow-up and takes a heavy blow to the chest that sends him flying. He coughs blood, gets back up, and is genuinely amazed by how terrifying the phantom sword is. Rudel's spirit form is pouring out mana like a living knight in his prime. Rudel flexes that even his own biological children could not learn the phantom sword, so his squishy necromancer has 0 chance, and then Klein copies it on the first try. The training ground becomes a blinding storm of overlapping illusory blades, both of them swinging the same lost technique, sparks everywhere, and Rudel demanding to know why a selfish necromancer would help the family of his sworn enemy. Right then Klein drops his guard and lets Rudel's blade connect, not because he is tired, but because he has decided to answer the question with his body instead of his mouth. Rudel freezes mid-strike, asks what Klein is doing, and Klein calmly admits that he used to think honor and loyalty were pathetic until he watched someone endure agony to protect a future for the kids. He says he wants to see that promised future himself, and he does not care what anyone thinks about it, the most sincere sentence this necromancer has spoken in 200 years. Rudel's expression softens. He confesses that the only reason he is still lingering is unresolved regret, and if the answers he wants are in that future, he is willing to bet on Klein. Rudel formally agrees to the contract, but not a master-servant deal. He wants a mutual agreement, because turning his own ancestor into a mind-controlled slave would make Klein a supervillain. They recite the vow together. Rudel entrusts his centuries-old resentment to the guide, and Archimond accepts the burden. The Death Knight contract locks into place in a blinding magical glow. Klein checks if Rudel can handle the weird physical side effects. Rudel stretches and says he feels fine, and Klein laughs that the old man worries too much for a ghost. Now backed by a legendary spirit, Klein says it is time to pay respects to his dear Aunt Hellion, and if you have ever said something polite while meaning the opposite, drop "Dear Aunt" in the comments. Cut to Erin asleep, then suddenly sitting bolt upright, whispering something about a death knight, screaming teriyaki cookie, and immediately face-planting back into her pillow like nothing happened. 3 days later, Klein is collapsed on a couch with a book over his face, because the Death Knight contract drained every drop of his demonic energy and his body is running at half capacity. Eren slaps the book off his face, announces they are ready to leave for House Wyvern, and then asks if he is dead, Maid of the Year. Every year. Eren immediately notices Klein has been sluggish for 3 days and calls him a liar when he claims he just has not slept well. She is 9 years old and already running a better intelligence network than the Holy Order. She snatches his book and holds it open to the Death Knight summoning circle, and Klein panics so hard he invents a new language, trying to explain that he was just reviewing it. Dunkel walks in mid-conversation. Eren accuses Klein of doing secret midnight research behind their backs, and a tall shadow named Dunkel appears by the window like the world's most inconvenient cameo. Klein internally imagines Dunkel finding out about Rudel, drawing a glowing sword and purifying him on the spot. The anxiety is so vivid it should have its own budget. But Dunkel just puts a hand on his shoulder and says it is all right. There is no need to be ashamed, which is how Klein learns that Dunkel has completely misunderstood the genre of this scene. Dunkel kneels to Eren and explains that the young master is going through a very important phase of his life, and she should expect him to look drained like this quite often from now on. Then Dunkel hits Klein with, "Boys tend to have a lot of pent-up energy during puberty, and Klein's soul leaves his body so fast it forgets to take the couch with it." Klein screams that he did not do that. Dunkel cheerfully says he must report this wonderful news to the Duke, and Klein mentally wishes he had turned Dunkel into a Death Knight instead of Rudel. A calm female voice calls Klein's name. He turns and there is Leia in full uniform, silver-haired and terrifying, announcing she is here to pick him up personally. Klein panics, asks if she heard what they were saying in the room, and Leia deadpans that she has no interest in his private affairs, which is not the same as no. Klein processes that Helion using a House Wyvern lady as an errand girl means she rules the house like a tyrant, and resolves to deal with her now before she becomes a massive threat later. Outside, 2 carriages wait. Klein walks to one, Leia asks where Eren went, and Klein casually says the maid wanted to ride a horse, so she let her sit up front. Klein sees Eren actually on a horse, takes a step toward the other carriage, and Leia grabs his shoulder with an iron grip. They are leaving right now, and he is riding with her. The door slams shut, and inside the rattling carriage, Leia stares at Klein and orders him to take off his clothes. Not a pickup line, but somehow more threatening. Klein refuses until she explains, and Leia lays out the situation. People across the territory have been going berserk with abnormal strength, and the common trait is irregular blue veins appearing on their bodies. She reminds him that his hands are not a knight's hands, yet he overpowered an imperial knight in pure swordsmanship, so she needs to check his body for the same blue marks. Klein decides to play along and launches into a smooth speech about how everything changes: talent, effort, necessity, but Leia cuts him off by asking why his height is still exactly the same. She adds that his back is the same, his shoulders are still incredibly narrow, and calls him a narrow-shouldered runt, the kind of damage no sword can block. Desperate, Klein remembers her promise at the trial by combat and leans in close. "You said you'd give me a kiss." Leia's stoic mask shatters instantly, face flushing red. They argue, "Yes, you did," versus "No, I didn't," until Leia breaks and stammers for him to just take his clothes off already, and Klein, riding high, tells her, "Don't you strip first." The carriage lurches, Leia regains composure, and clarifies that she has no personal reason to touch him. She is a lady of House Wyvern and a knight commander first, and only wanted to clear her suspicions. Klein asks what happens if she is wrong, and Leia promises to take full responsibility for the rudeness, so Klein smirks and says he will hold her to that. They arrive at the House Wyvern estate, which is massive enough to make their own mansion look like a starter home, and Eren immediately announces it reeks of wealth. Klein notices Leia has vanished the moment they arrived, and an older gentleman with a mustache approaches, Gordon, chief butler of the House Wyvern estate, who formally welcomes Lord Klein Rhineland. Eren steps forward and introduces Klein as their young master, who is currently going through puberty, and Klein shoots her a side eye so vicious it could qualify as a weapon. Gordon smiles, invites them inside, and mentions that Grand Duchess Helene is waiting, then adds that it has been a very long time since a Rhineland Duke's family last visited. Cloyne notes Gordon was the late Duke's closest confidant, so there is no reason for him to say loaded things to an outsider unless Gordon considers Cloyne an ally. Cloyne asks directly how the late Duke passed away, but before Gordon can answer, confident footsteps echo, and a woman's voice notes that Cloyne has finally arrived. Guards snap to attention. Someone announces the Grand Duchess, and Helene steps out to greet them personally, pale blonde hair, sharp eyes, and a smile that has never once meant welcome. She welcomes her beloved nephew, Cloyne, and remarks that he looks exactly like her brother, and if you have ever been greeted by a relative who clearly wants something from you, drop beloved nephew in the comments.